Want to keep up with the latest LEGO Maker 96.1 videos? Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Hello everyone, LEGO Maker 96.1 here with another video. And welcome back to another On This Day in History. Now before I can begin, I just want to get one thing out of the way. And I know you probably saw the video a couple days before, but I have to say it again. My most deepest apologies if I haven't posted anything in a while. Just I was busy with a medical emergency relating to my family, and my DeviantArt account was seized by scammers. But don't worry, everyone's okay, they're in good health. I got my DeviantArt account back by scammers, and everything is okay now. Now, with all that out of the way, let's go right into Fredericksburg. Now, on this day in history, back in 1862, the Battle of Fredericksburg came to a tragic end for the Union Army. Now, December 11th marked the anniversary of a brutal turning point in the American Civil War. The start of the Battle of Fredericksburg in 1862. This was a battle where Union valor met Confederate fortifications and failed, leading to one of the most crushing defeats for the North. Yeah, you probably recognize it in some of the Civil War documentaries or even some of the textbooks on the Civil War. And if you remember Gods and Generals, which talks about the rise and fall of the legendary Confederate general Thomas Jonathan Jackson, Fredericksburg was covered. Though interesting fact about that movie, you know the entire sequence of Fredericksburg? Well, some of the stuff was actually filmed at Harper's Ferry to give it that feel of Fredericksburg. Because if you look at Fredericksburg now, it was slightly different as it was back in 1862. But with that out of the way, let's go over to history. Now, after the Battle of Antietam, Abraham Lincoln, one of my favorite presidents by the way, was furious with George B. McClellan in action and was replaced by Ambrose Burnside. If you've seen his picture, you may recognize it with his famous sideburns. Now Burnside took command of the Union Army of the Potomac. Now Burnside's plan was to make a swift dash to the Confederate capital, Richmond, Virginia, by crossing the Rappahannock River at the town of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Now, the strength of the Union Army was 122,009. The Confederacy was 78,513. However, appearances tend to differ in regards to strength. This was in Wikipedia, which I mentioned earlier. According to the American Battlefield Trust, the forces that were engaged, it was 123,000 for the Union and 78,000 for the Confederates. These are a lot of guys. Now the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, led by Robert E. Lee, he was waiting for them. Lee had positioned roughly 75,000 men on the heights south of and west of the town, giving them a massive defensive advantage. But you're probably wondering, why didn't they attack before then? Well, all this has to do with pontoon bridges. The battle began with a costly delay before the Union. Burnside needed pontoon bridges to cross the Rappahannock River into Fredericksburg. But bad weather and slow delay meant the bridges didn't arrive after Lee fortified the heights. It's just south and west of Fredericksburg. Now, December 11th, 1862, the battle was underway. As Union Army Corps of Engineers began building the pontoon bridges, the Confederate sharpshooters see these guys building the bridge. They just took up sharpshooter positions and boom, they opened fire on those guys. And the battle had begun. And knowing this, they had Union troops sent their own guys to stop the Confederates. And the Army Corps of Engineers were still building and even under fire. But there's something else you need to know as well. Not only did these guys cross the Rappahannock River or on bridges, but they also did it through boats. Something that was seen numerous times throughout warfare, but this was relatively new. And speaking of new, urban warfare was created. You remember World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and all those events? The Civil War gave birth to urban warfare. It is literally going house by house, street by street, block by block, rooting out Confederates and either capturing or killing them. And some of these guys were given the Black Flag Law, meaning taking no prisoners, in which, if you remember from Gods and Generals, they showed urban warfare. You see Confederates coming up from behind buildings and opening firing on Union troops. Some from upper levels, lower levels, behind buildings, barrels, boxes. Urban warfare. But while Union forces were engaging Confederates with artillery bombardments and infantry, they cleared the Confederates out of town, causing extensive damage. And not only that, not only did they seize the town, but Union troops began looting. You remember Pirates of the Caribbean? In fact, pretty much every single warfare, Union soldiers looted everything. They pillage, plunder, rifle, loot. Sorry, force of habit. Now, the next day, December 12th, Burnside's entire army, over 120,000 strong, had crossed the Rappahannock River. Now, the next day, December 13th, the main fighting took place as Burnside launched two separate attacks on the entrenched Confederates. One of them being the southern flank, and the other being Marye's Heights. Now, remember that. Marye's Heights. That spot alone on the Fredericksburg battlefield saw some of the heaviest fighting of that battle. If you remember from Gods and Generals, some of these troops went up in piecemeal fashion, regiment by regiment. But why those formations? Well, it's all due to Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France. You have these guys standing shoulder to shoulder in tight formations, you crossing an open field as Confederate infantry and artillery start pounding you. And these guys just kept going. It was crazy, let me tell you. Now, the southern flank, the attack was led by Major General William Franklin. He attacked the Confederate right flank that was held by Lieutenant General Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. Now, I know I did cover this before, but how did Jackson got the nickname Stonewall? Well, all this has to do with, excuse me here, all this has to do with the Battle of First Bull Run, or Manassas, as the Southern guys call it, the first major battle of the American Civil War. Thomas Jonathan Jackson got the nickname Stonewall Jackson by standing like a stone wall, to show Confederate forces that, hey, we're not going anywhere. In fact, General Bernard B. said it best. Look, there stands Jackson like a stone wall, rallied behind the Virginians. So it's basically, hey, there's this guy that's standing on his own, let's go to his aid, in layman's terms. Excuse me on that. But enough about that history. Back to Fredericksburg. However, Franklin's attack was successful at first, briefly punching a hole in the Confederate line, and due to the unexpected swampy gap. But however, the Union advance was disorganized and they were met by a fierce Confederate counterattack by Jackson's reserve. Now, Confederate forces quickly plugging that gap drove the Union forces back with heavy losses. Now, Marye's Heights. Remember that. Like I said, that spot saw the heaviest fighting. If you remember from Gods and Generals, It was this large open field with a hill in which Confederates were entrenched, and they had to fire their guns in a conveyor belt fashion. Now, the weapons was percussion caps, muskets, rifled muskets, even smoothbore muskets. Now, I'm going to go over the weaponry here on the American Civil War. Now, back in the 18th century, even late into the 18th century, and into the mid to late 19th century, just until the Mexican-American War, soldiers in the Army, the Navy, and the Marines carried flintlocks. But by the 1840s, they were phased out and replaced with the percussion cap. Now, if you look up the image of a percussion cap, you'll see it's a little brass top hat, right? Well, that little brass cap has a chemical inside it called fulminated mercury, which is highly explosive on impact. The weapon loads exactly the same way you saw the arrow to flintlocks, but except now you load the weapon first and you prime it second, and the cap fits on the nipple at the back of the breech. Now, the first to be made was a model 1842 Springfield. It is a 69 caliber smoothbore musket. Now, there's a difference between rifled and smoothbore. Rifling has these metal grooves inside the barrel of the gun to make the bullet spin as it goes flying out the barrel, and it makes the bullet fly longer. Smoothbore is like a piece of pipe, smooth on the outside and smooth on the inside. And whatever which way the bullet rattled, it could hit something. That's how it was back in the Revolution, the War of 1812, the Napoleonic Wars, and many wars against the Native Americans. True facts. Now, the Confederate position on Marye's Heights was near impregnable. Now, the Confederate position on Marye's Heights was nearly impregnable. Longstreet's corps was dug in by a thick sunken road protected by a 4-foot high stone wall, in which, if you may remember from Gods and Generals, and yes, I am referencing Gods and Generals a lot because it's a good movie, like you see these guys, these like 3 to 4 rows of Confederate soldiers. Now, they were firing their guns in a conveyor belt fashion. Now, one guy would be loading, one guy would be ramming, one guy would be capping, and one guy would be firing. Now, once you fire your gun, you hand your rifle back to the guy, and you fire again. Now, this was before machine guns. Long before machine guns, even. And you remember the Gatling gun? That, too, was a Civil War invention. You're welcome. Now, Confederates massed artillery, and it's lined on the crest of the heights, giving them a clear, sweeping field of fire over an open ground leading to the stone wall. And do you know how many attacks were led by the Union Army? 14. Yeah, Burnside launched 14 separate charges throughout the day. Each charge, when brave Union men marched into merciless hailstorm of bullets and artillery fire, and none of them came within 50 feet of that wall. Now, the Irish Brigade, they did that. The 114th Pennsylvania Zouaves, the 20th Maine. None of these guys got close to the stone wall. It's crazy. And elephant in the room, what was Burnside thinking? I mean, you got these guys going out there in an open field, no artillery fire, or covering these guys, and yet you send them out there 14 different times? Not to quote the angry video game nerd here, but what were you thinking? In fact, throughout the entire thing, James Longstreet famously observed throughout the entire thing, in which I quote, "We covered that ground with an almost sheet of lead, and I felt as though I was slaughtering my own people," end quote. It was crazy. It was also there that Lee said, "It is well that war is terrible, but we should grow too fond of it." But by the end of the day on December 13th, the battle was a clear Confederate victory. But what happened on the 14th? Well, the 14th was pretty much a standstill. Although you get some punk shots from Confederates shooting on Union soldiers who still survived, and some were still wounded, and it was again at a standstill. And though interesting fact that you didn't know. Have you ever heard the Angel of Marie's Heights? Well, all this has to do with one Confederate soldier who, risking his own life, went over the stone wall after gathering canteen from his comrades and administering aid to the wounded Union soldiers stranded on those heights. That angel's name was Richard Kirkland. Now, Kirkland was a sergeant at the time of the battle, and he heard Union soldiers crying out for help, some of them crying out for water. So what he did, he gathered canteens from his buddies, his comrades, and risking his own life, he went over the stone wall and goes to the first Union soldier he sees. Now, some Federals mistaken him as a looter, but as they leveled their guns, they saw what Kirkland was doing. He was giving aid to the Union soldiers, giving them water, covering them in warm clothing. The guy was just giving them aid. It was one of the most poignant moments of the Civil War. And another fact that you didn't know. You remember that scene in Gods and Generals where both Union and Confederate soldiers were looking up into the night sky? Well, believe it or not, the Aurora Borealis was there on that night. Oh yeah, you heard right. The Northern Lights were there on the night of the 14th. To the Confederates, is think the heavens were celebrating their victory, which is kind of redundant, but it was there. Now, for me, I never saw the Northern Lights. I mean, I want to. I mean, I've seen videos of it, I've seen pictures of it, and it looked breathtaking. Now, even though it was at a standstill, Burnside finally called off the attack, and despite initial thought of renewing the assault, he would draw all his forces across the Rappahannock River on the 15th, thus ending the battle. Now, for the casualties of that battle, sources tend to differ. Now, according to Wikipedia, the Union Army lost 12,653 total. This includes 1,284 dead, 9,600 wounded, and 1,796 captured or missing. The Confederates have 5,377 total. This includes 608 dead, 4,116 wounded, 653 captured or missing. For the American Battlefield Trust, it's 12,500 for the Union and 6,000 for the Confederates, leaving an estimated total of 18,500. Now, like I said, this was a costly battle. And was the immense loss of life, particularly due to the fruitless charges on Marie's Heights, is led by widespread demoralization of the North and a crisis of confidence in the Lincoln administration. Furious at what Burnside did, excuse me on that, my headphones. Now, Lincoln replaced Burnside with Joseph Hooker. Now, Hooker was a critic of Burnside. And, you know, I'm a critic of Burnside as well. I mean, 14 separate charges. I mean, if I was a Union soldier who survived that hell on Marie's Heights, I would have confronted Burnside. I would have told him that you got my guys killed up there. Take my advice, General. Go to your tent with a pistol and blow out what's left of your brains. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but what was Burnside thinking? Now, Burnside, like I said, was relieved of command and soon after. And the Confederates, meanwhile, celebrated a decisive victory that bolstered their morale in the prolonged war. Thus, the war would continue until 1865 with Robert E. Lee's surrender. And yeah, I did talk about Gods and Generals a lot in this video. It's because it's a good film. Granted, there were some problems left and right, but overall, it did stick to the Civil War quite a bit. I mean, it covered her first Bull Run, Antietam if you got the extended, deleted scene, if you got the extended version of the movie, and Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, where Jackson met his end. But even though Fredericksburg was demoralized the Union Army, the war would continue. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. And that concludes this video. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like this, including many other videos that I've done on my channel, please feel free to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell notifications so that way you can be notified when I upload the next video. And as always, this is LEGO Mega 96 1 signing off.